Wow, today was a huge day for Magic Online and for those of us who play Commander because they announced some big changes to the format. And with that in mind, Breya, as it was, is gutted pretty effectively by the changes, which isn't to say that control could not exist, but um, it may not be the way to go anymore. So, uh, previously, the deck was based around effectively two things. You wanted to get you wanted to access your soaring and mana crypt before your opponent could, and use them for to generate an insurmountable advantage to just snowball ahead. And you wanted to prevent your opponent from having access to their soaring and mana crypt, and that's no longer what the format's going to be about anymore. So with that gone from the format, Brian and I were talking about what a new deck might look like. Whether or not we wanted to stick with the same type of thing or maybe branch out and try something new. We still both really like Breya, and we decided with that vein to try something new, something we've been experimenting with already for a while. But with the changes, it just, at the time we were experimenting, we really weren't convinced that it was better than the control deck. But with the changes, gutting most of the tools of the control deck, we have decided that this new version of Breya may actually be the way to go. There's still a lot to figure out in this format. I'm very excited about the changes. I think that there are more that need to come. They do probably need to break up the multiplayer and single player ban lists because, well, for a lot of reasons. But I don't really want to make that the focus of this video. And there's a few other things I'd like to see happen as well. But I think this is a big step in the right direction. I am so glad to see that the entire format no longer needs to revolve around the existence of Soul Ring and Mana Crypt. I love the cards, and I loved being the deck that was the best at abusing them and keeping other people from doing the same. But it's been that way for a very long time now. Practically 8 years is what that format's been about, and it is time for a shake-up. So I think this is probably doing good things for us. So, what is the new Breya list? Well, let me show you. It is Reanimator. So the new Breya list tries to do something different. It tries to capitalize on the impact of reanimating high-cost creatures with low-cost spells to effectively generate the kind of mana generation that we were previously getting from abusing Soul Ring and Crypt. So instead of generating tons and tons and tons of free mana over the course of time and using that to create strong positions, we're now just creating strong positions very quickly and early, and in the process producing tons of free mana. When you reanimate a Jingatoxis, you have essentially earned yourself 10 mana for the price of 1. It is the world's best dark ritual. Um, first of all, I want to go over the deck tech a little bit, and then I want to show you some games. So for deck tech, this may not be the final build. In fact, we're just getting started, so it's definitely not the final build. But this is where we're at so far, and I think Brian's is a different variation of this. We are completely not locked in. We are not like, okay, he plays this way, I play that way. We're super flexible in figuring this format out. But we're starting here roughly. So 6 creatures right now at a minimum is what we think. It might be possible we need a few more. It could be that the ones we have change, but the thought process is you want at least 3 anti-control cards and 3 anti-creature cards. 3 anti-aggro cards to be more specific. So the anti-control cards of choice here are the best, which is Jin-Gitaxias, Void Winnower, which is very strong against control, and Iona Shield, the Iona, which locks out any mono-color control like mono black, mono blue. It is also just generally very good at disrupting your opponent. And then for anti-aggro, we have Elish Norn, who kills masses of weenies. Shieldred, who kills individual large creatures, regardless of whether or not they have pro color. So, for example, people who go all in and stacking up gigantic equipment or enchantments on a creature can still lose that creature to Shieldred. And lastly, unlike the Abyss, and then lastly, Sphinx of the Steel Wind. This is a hedge against people just saying, forget your creatures, I'm going to go, Lightning Bolt chain lightning, etc., etc. We're just going to go straight to the face and try to finish this game. Sphinx of the Stuhlin makes it somewhere between hard and impossible for them to actually pull that off. Especially if in their deck they're actually mono red rather than say red black. Well, then in that case you can probably shut them down with Iona. But if they get too much of an advantage, for example, a Goblin deck, too many little guys on the board too early, you don't have Elish Norn available for whatever reason, well, Sphinx might be a way that you can save yourself. It's a secondary plan to get out of burn range and shut down their offense all at once. So if you look at the mana curve on this deck, it is amazing. The fact that the deck has 21 drops and 22 drops, not 22, but 20 drops at 2 mana is pretty nice. And we, considering that we're not going to have the fast mana, we want to actually push the mana curve a lot lower. And on top of that, some of the cards at the top end, 6 creatures, for example, we don't intend to cast those at full price anyway. And then you've got Force of Will, which is generally free. Unburial Rites is often 4 mana. Dread Return can be 0. Deep Analysis is frequently 2, and so forth. So the mana curve on this is insane, and it's actually even better than if you plug it into a online calculator, it'll calculate higher than it actually is, considering how you plan to play most of these cards. I'm using the only fast mana that's really left in the format, which is Chrome Mox and Mox Diamond, simply because, and there's quality cards. And card disadvantage is less important to me than having stable, consistent, and powerful early starts. With that in mind, of course, I have many card disadvantage cards. I have Faithless Looting, all the Vampiric and Imperial Seal cards, Careful Study. And there's tons of card disadvantage, Frantic Search, Arcane Denial cards that I used to scoff at when people would play them. They make sense in here only because if you're going, like let's say you're playing mono blue and you Frantic Search a Iona into your graveyard, which means you're down a card, then you Arcane Denial their attempts to prevent you from reanimating it, which means you're down even more cards. But then Iona's in play against mono blue, and guess what? None of those cards matter that you're down because the game's over, they're not playing any spells, and suddenly you're up 87 cards or whatever they have left in their hand and library. So for that reason, that's why the disadvantageous cards actually make the cut in here. So there's a few key plays I want to talk about that you want to be looking out for to make with the deck. And then other than that, we'll just play some games and you can kind of like see over the course of videos how things play out and start to derive your own lines of play. And I'm sure mine will get more sophisticated as well as we go forward. So starting out, one of the things that's in here that wasn't in previously in the control deck, and for very good reason, I might add, is Personal Tutor. Personal Tutor is okay. We tried it out back when Miracles first came out, when Miracle cards came out. We tried it out in Commander and realized quickly that it was just too inflexible. You don't always want to go get a Miracle, and when you didn't, you just couldn't do enough with this card. It's very slow. I mean, it was kind of a bad Imperial Seal, and Imperial Seal is a bad Vampiric Tutor, and it was just a bridge too far. In this deck, however, the card's fantastic because there's so many cards like, for example, if you can Personal Tutor for Reanimate or Exhume, then you may just win the game on the spot. If you Personal Tutor for Buried Alive, you're setting yourself up to win a game, and so on and so forth. But if you don't know what to Personal Tutor for, and the answer is not Night's Whisper because you're just desperate to get a couple cards in your hand and you're having problems with your mana base, the answer is you Personal Tutor for Quiet Speculation. So you Personal Tutor for Quiet Spec, and then you spec into the traditional package is Faithless Looting, Deep Analysis, and Unburial Rites. Okay. So if you Personal Tutor into Quiet Spec, and then you spec into these 3 cards on the next turn. Let's say your next play is going to be a Karoo, a bounce land, like Dimer Aqueduct, okay? Which means you're not going to have 3 mana. So what you do is you flashback Deep Analysis, making up for the card loss of Personal Tutor, and then you play the bounce land and you pick up one of those cards, and then on the next turn you'll have 4 mana. You'll also have too many cards in hand, which will allow you to discard a big creature. Let's say your next land drop is not a card like Dimer Aqueduct. In that case, what you do is you just play your 3rd land and you Faithless Looting, allowing you to discard a big creature. And then on turn 4, you can flashback Unbarrow Rights. So you can see there's a couple different ways that this hand results in you flashing back Unbarrow Rights on a big creature, provided you have that creature. And if you don't, then Deep Analysis first, so you can dig 2, and then looting later so that you can dig even further. And that got you 4 cards deeper into your deck and pulled out 3 misses so that you can find your big creature, and then of course you can Unbarrow Rights, or a way to put a big creature in your graveyard such as Buried Alive. The other package you can do alternately, if Unbarrow Rights is not available to you for some reason, then what you can do is you can use Dread Return in its place. Or if you don't need one of these other cards, for example, you could potentially just use both Rights and Dread. And what Dread Return does is it allows you to cast Breya and sacrifice your 2 flyers plus Breya to immediately flashback Dread Return. So if you hit 4 mana and you have Dread Return in your graveyard, you can effectively do what amounts to flashing back Unbarrow Rights. It's superior to flashback Rights and not do the Breya trick on Dread, because then your commander doesn't cost 2 extra mana for starters. And secondly, if you have 4 mana, you could always hardcast Dread Return and then flash it back later if you need to. So it's much preferable to reduce the Unbarrow Rights cost by 1 and making it a flashback spell. It costs 4 rather than 5. And for that to be your primary go-to, and Dread Return to be more of a backup if you need it. So that's the Personal Tutor Quiet Speculation package, and it's really nice to have the old friend Quiet Speculation back to play with again, and very funny and kind of awkward for me in a way to be playing Quiet Speculation and not play Mystical Teachings, which used to be one of the alternate cards that I could get. Now, if for some reason you can't, if you have, I don't know how this could have happened, but somehow Deep Analysis is gone, Looting is gone, and you still need to get 3 cards, like say those 2 cards got burned out early, well, you could get Dread, Unbarrow Rights, and you could actually go get Forbidden Alchemy, and that's okay too. Alchemy, of course, at 7 is extremely expensive to flash back. Its main use in here is to just dig early and then put something in your graveyard, possibly, but it is an option as well. So there's another funny, quirky interaction. We'll get some games going here, which is Baral. So Baral in this deck has a couple of different things you can do. First of all, one of the things you can do is you can go turn 2 Baral, and you can go turn 3. You can play Buried Alive for 2 mana, and then Exhume for 1 mana, or of course, Reanimate. And so you can go right directly into a 5 mana play for only 3 mana on turn 3, which is very, very good. Another trick you can do with Baral, though, so you play Baral, right? And then you can play a series. You can make a series of plays. So let's say you went first turn Personal Tutor for the Quiet Spec package, and then second turn you go Baral rather than flashing back Deep Analysis like normal. Then on turn 3, what you can do is you can flash back Deep Analysis for 1 mana, and you can flash back Faithless Looting for 2 mana, and so you can dig really deep, really fast. Yet another use of Baral is in that same scenario. Let's say you flash back Deep Analysis for 1 mana, and then you've got 2 left. Well, what you could do in that case is, actually, let me go ahead and back up. The other thing about Baral is that I'm focusing on the mana reduction, but the other thing about him is that whenever you counter a spell, you may draw and discard a card. So in this deck, that could be an enabler where you can very quickly set yourself up for success. For example, you go turn 2 Baral, turn 3 you go Quiet Spec for 1 blue, Deep Analysis for 1 blue, and then you're sitting on a blue, and you say go, and your opponent makes a play. You counterspell it like Mana Leak, Mana Mary Lapse, or any of these other counterspells that are in here, even Arcane Denial, whatever. Draw and discard a fatty, and boom, you're off to the races. So great card for this deck, I think. Functions as a signet that does way more than what we need from our signets, which is exactly what we want from every card slot. Crucible Worlds still allows you to do the Strip Mine Lock. However, that's nowhere near the focus of the deck. It's very slow and clunky, but hey, if you can pull it off and win and the opponent loses to it, they might deserve to. The main thing about it is Crucible is in here because you want to consistently hit land drops. That's the most important thing with his deck. And it's one of the reasons why, as a matter of fact, I'm actually running 3 lands that are higher risk but higher reward, and it's these 3 right here. These 3 lands allow you to keep, even though you only have 32 lands, if one of them, if you get into a series of those lands right there, you can actually hit your land drops for a very, very, very long time. And with Crucible, of course, you can extend that out indefinitely. So um, Crucible's just more about you getting consistent land drops and doing things like Faithless looting away 2 lands when you miss on fatties, and then replaying one and allowing you to build turn Faithless looting and Frantic Search and stuff into actual card draw versus card draw back. So um, it also works very well with Dak Faden's activated ability and so forth. So enough on Crucible. That's pretty much all. The rest of the cards choices, I think, relatively well speak for themselves, and they're certainly still in flux in a great deal of way. And there's cards that I don't have in here that I'd very much like to play in here, and I either don't have them because I actually don't have the money. I ran out trying to put this deck together for my budget. Out of all the cards I didn't have, I had to put together a number of cards, and it came out to be at the end of my budget until payday, or I might for casual expenses, or I don't have cards in here that I would like to play just simply because I don't know what slot to put them in yet, and I got to see what shakes out and what's valuable and what's not. So I will have a link to the deck list for Tapped Out, and I will also keep the old Breya list archived for your entertainment pleasure. And that's about all I have to say about this deck. I think we need to play some games. Um, yeah, I didn't miss anything. There are a number of other cards I've considered, certainly. And I would like to see comments and suggestions. First of all, if you're interested in this deck and you like it, let me know, please. It's always nice to know that I'm not wasting your time. Secondly, if you have any thoughts about what I've what are you thinking? Why aren't you playing Terastodon? Well, the answer to that, of course, is I can't play green. But in other cases, if you have some ideas, please throw them at me. I would have Terastodon in the package of creatures that I could be using if I were allowed to. Believe me. All right, so anyway, here's some games. And my opponent was playing here Temet, Vizier of Naktamoon. Anyway, regardless, I had to read it a few times to understand that it was basically not going to be good against me. And then with this hand, it was going to be worse than not good. It was going to be utterly useless, as you'll see very shortly. So I go first turn, Careful Study. And I make a little bit of a tech play here in a very small sense. In off-lane play, you get to do stuff like this a lot better. But I go ahead and bury the Jingatoxis under the other 2 cards in order to hide it, what I'm doing from my opponent. If it's in the middle towards the bottom, he may not be paying attention to my graveyard all that much. Anyway, I get second turn during my upkeep, Mystical Tutor, play a fetch land, reanimate Jingatoxis, and scoop. I'm about to draw 7 cards. Apparently he doesn't have Oblivion Ring, Swords to Plowshare's Path to Exile, yada yada yada, Gilded Drake, whatever. He doesn't seem to have an answer at all, so that is death. Death, and by card drawing, which is fine with me, and mind twisting. Fastest mind twist I've ever had attached to a Brain Geyser, certainly. Okay, so game 2, I'm playing against Edric, and I want to show you an aspect of the deck that's a little bit interesting here, actually, in this game. So I duress him, and I see a bunch of garbage cards, a bunch of garbage creatures, and only 1 forest. And so anyway, turn 2, I go ahead and play as it. Boiler works, looks safe. That's the other thing too, is you can check their hand before you play the Karuz. And my opponent just drops out 2 guys rather than playing his Scrib Ranger, which allows me to wasteland his forest. And he did find a land at some point. He found an island, as you'll see, but it's not a forest. So I'm quite nervous that he's going to get up to 4 creatures, but I've got to play like he won't. So I go ahead and Thirst, and I think the natural response here from that Thirst would be discard Shieldred and Elishnorn, and then go ahead and proceed to win the game. But I decide that I have a different tactic to take. Unfortunately, I did draw, or fortunately, I drew Demonic Tutor, so I could have been better off having discarded Shieldred and Elishnorn, but as you'll see here, I am probably doing fine. So I go for Buried Alive here as a setup play. My opponent has Abjure, and it's a card that I very well think could make this deck, strangely enough, because you get 3 blue permanents when you play Breya. It actually pretty interesting to me. But anyway, so my opponent scoops here, realizing he only has 2 creatures left and he's not getting through against my 3. But had he not, do you see what was about to happen? No reanimation necessary at all. This deck, because of the Karuz, the bounce lands, and the Ancient Tomb, the fact that I have 3 lands that produce 2 mana each, off the back of just 4 lands, I'm about to hard cast Elish Norning, wipe his board. And should he have a counterspell, that's okay. I'll just untap and then cast Shieldred, which will reanimate Elish Norn anyway and start killing his guys off. This game is over. So I thought that was pretty cool because it shows how the deck can play. It can still play a strong control element despite being, well, as you saw in game 1, a combo deck. All right, so here's a hand. Very, very nice hand. I'm excited to run this one. So we will lead off with Underground Nothing. And I'm going to go ahead and vamp at the end of my opponent's turn. And he is playing, what is he playing? Oh, Zerillion of the Claw. All right, so he's vamped for Ancient Tomb. And my opponent is, so he's playing some kind of dragon thing and gives his guys haste and I don't know what. So anyway, I'm building up. So I set up myself up because of the Crucible by going and getting Tomb. And now I've got Personal Tutor. And I've got Force of Will with Alchemy. So I'm setting myself up real nice. So I Personal Tutor here for a sorcery. And the sorcery I get is Buried Alive. So all of his dragons are now cheaper because of Urza's Incubator. I'm just going to let that go. All right, so it's time to Bury It Alive. So make that play there. Taking a ton of damage. Actually tap my mana super awkwardly. I'm not quite sure why I did it this way. So I put Iona, Jin-Gitaxias, and Void Winnower. That's normally my package against control. But he's I'm thinking about what I plan to do with this mono red player, and that plan is to get hit in the face with the dragon. And now that that's done, the second half of my master plan comes into play, which is Living Death, Iono naming red, Jin-Gitaxias filling my hand and mind twisting him, and Void Winnower making it so that he's not allowed to play Nevinyrral's Disc. Good game. All right, so I played this guy Leonidas. He just went like first turn mana crypt something something. Yeah, I have zero interest in playing out a game like that. It was not even slightly interesting to me. Now, normally I would play out, and you've seen me do it many times, facing Soul Rings and Crypts. However, in a deck that doesn't have them, yeah, I'm not going to do it. So I just scooped. I don't care. All right, so this is a great hand, and this is a perfect quiet speculation hand, right? So first turn we go Island Tutor. We're down to 5 cards in hand. Second turn we draw to 6, play a land down to 5, cast Quiet Spec. Flashback Deep Analysis. Boom, we're back up to 7 cards. We have 2 lands in play, and at that point we have 7 cards with 2 cards in the graveyard. Very good. Well, 2 actionable cards in the graveyard. We have our reanimation spell and whatnot. Of course, my opponent gave up, unfortunately, so you didn't get to see it in action. But the Quiet Spec package is extremely satisfying in this deck. Very powerful as well. All right, so here we go. I've got a game. I don't know what my opponent's playing here. I suppose I should check. Yidris. I think this was an interesting game too. All right, I'm just going to run the Boiler Works out because if he has the removal for it, if he plays a Strip Mine rather than playing Land Bloom Tender, that's fine. We just go. Excuse me for the hiccup. We just go back to me getting down, and doing things with Demonic Tutor, and so the whole deck is 2 and 3 mana. So fortunately, he does not have it though, and that's much better than fine. So I'm going to dump Jin-Gitaxias, Shieldred, Elish Norn. The thinking being that Elish Norn and Jin and Shieldred will shut down his creatures, and Jin will shut down his blue side, and Shieldred will make all of it happen. The problem is here I wanted to actually cast Breya to set up for Victimize, but he's got Defense of the Heart out, and if I have 3 creatures, he's going to get to tinker 2 creatures directly into play. That's pretty much game over, so now I have to figure out how to win quickly in the face of a Yidris, a Bloom Tender who taps for 4, and a Defense of the Heart who won't let me play creatures. Well, the way I do it is Baral into a Victimize that only costs 2 mana, giving me Shieldred and Elish Norn. Elish Norn comes into play and kills Bloomtender. Shieldred kills Yidris during his upkeep. My opponent tries to kill. He uses Merciless Executioner to allow me to sacrifice a creature. I sacrifice Elish Norn, and then use Shieldred's ability to replay Jingatoxis. I then Dak Faden into a Mox Diamond, which pitches Cephalid Colosseum, which is actually no longer in the deck. I Demonic Tutor here for a Disenchant on Defense of the Heart, because Shieldred forces me to put creatures into place. The next turn, that thing would be triggering his next turn, of course. However, even though I would have put Elish Norn into play and hit him for 11 plus 4, 15, wouldn't have been enough to kill him, and that Defense of the Heart might have actually been enough to win. But with the Disenchant on the stack, Elish Norn and Shieldred running, my opponent gives up. Of course, he doesn't know that I also have a Negate in my hand that only costs 1 mana, thanks to my guys being big enough to trigger it. But I don't think that would have mattered. I think he was perfectly right to concede. So why did I cut Cephalid Colosseum when it seems custom made from the deck? If you were wondering, the answer is that I wanted more black sources in the deck, a lot more than I wanted a card that's super late gamey and kind of gimmicky and not really, like, if you get to the point where if you've got 7 cards in your graveyard and you can now start using Colosseum, then you probably have already found a way to put a big guy in the graveyard, or you're doing something right. Either that or things are going pretty wrong, and then in which case you don't want to be sacking mana sources. I talked about it with Brian, and his feeling was similar, so based on his input, I went ahead and just upped the black mana in the deck. So now I have Alumni, I believe, or was that the same guy? Hopefully it's not the same guy. Let's see. Yeah, that's the Idris guy. Okay, let's skip that one, and we'll move on to Guzen. Oh, Guozen. Okay, there we go. Got the pronunciation right, and he is playing SRAM. I've actually seen this guy show up a lot, and he's actually a major pain. He's really cheap, gets under counters, and then he draws so many insane amounts of cards that sometimes he just completely dominates. So I first turn Inquisition him, and I take out Mana Crypt, a card I'll be very glad to see go away, and then drew a Disenchant, ironically. So, okay. Sometimes that's how it goes. The problem for my opponent is he kept based on the assumption he was going to get to use that Mana Crypt. So his hand is almost completely worthless now. So I just start laying pressure on him with Breya and pretty much just do nothing. Plan here is that I'm going to Intuition with Swang Song backing it up, and I'm going to go get 3 fatties, one of which will be Iona. So it'll be Iona, Jingatoxis, and Shieldred. And I'm going to present the question to my opponent. Would you like to never cast a white spell again? Would you like to discard your entire hand while I draw 7 cards? Or would you prefer to have me put an Abyss into play who will reanimate whichever of the other 2 things you allowed to go to my graveyard? And when I ask him that question, his answer is going to be Scoop anyway, so he just saved time by not even waiting to see the Intuition that was basically going to kill him. And that's fine with me. So then I go against Chefa. But see, by banning Soul Ring and Crypt now, people won't have games where they have their Soul Ring or Crypt destroyed and they just automatically scoop right off the bat. And they only kept it because he had Mana Crypt. That won't happen anymore. So that's actually probably a net positive. And this was a great game. So I mulligan into this hand and decide to keep it. The problem is it doesn't have black. I'm playing against Braids, so there's a lot of potential, the blue Braids. There's a lot of potential for my opponent to do something completely absurd. So I have to at all times be aware that blue Braids could come down and ruin my day. I have no, even though I'm playing Reanimator, I have no fatty to put into play here. So I decided I could have played Mox Diamond there and played like Inquisition or Vamp, but I'd rather have an Ancient Tomb into play. I can wait. It looks like we're playing some Drago for a little while, so I will play that for a while and hold the Mox Diamond because I consider Tomb to be too valuable, especially when I have Frantic Search and it's actually mana production if I need it to be. So opponent goes for Braids here, and I decide that I'm going to go ahead and just give him extra cards with an Arcane Denial, but it's going to help me dig as well because I really need to get something going here. I drew 2 lands in that turn, so that's a perfect turn to play Mox Diamond. Inquisition him, and I take out Unsummon, and then he reveals a ton of other control magic effects. So I'm looking at like a real problem here. I could and probably should have played Breya and then just sacked in response to control magic, but I end up playing. I end up playing too tepidly, and I end up paying for it. So I try for an end of turn deprive, and my opponent has, excuse me, vampiric tutor. My opponent has deprive, but I spell snare it, and then go ahead and resolve the vamp into quiet speculation. So, because I feel like I'm really low on cards, and I need to get some refuel here. So I go ahead and spec, and I end up selecting, I believe, yeah. So the standard package of no, no. I take an unusual package. So I get Unburial Rites and Deep. That's pretty much a given. But then I also take Forbidden Alchemy because I have so much mana. I'm mana flooded. That alchemy is actually going to be card drawing, and it might even be an enabler. And off of the, I got a land and a reanimate off of the deep analysis. So good things are happening. So my opponent goes for an end of turn braid. So in response to that, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to run out Forbidden Alchemy and see what happens. So if there's a big creature in here, I just set it in the off pile, and then that goes to my graveyard, but there's not. So I end up taking Yogg-Will, and then Enlightened Tutoring in response to Braids, and then with Braids' ability still on the stack during my upkeep, I go ahead and Frantic Search into discarding Dread Return, and I don't know what. I throw away the Reanimate because I'm holding Yogg-Will. Into a Crucible though, and I play the Crucible for free off the Braids. Then I go ahead and play my Breya and immediately kill his Braids, leaving just the bird in play. If he wants to control magic that, be my guest. Then he plays Diluvian Primordial. So I sack to draw 3 and discard 3 in response. And you'll see here how Cephalid Colosseum really proves not to be all that good. I end up wasting a lot of time using it, when what I should have done is just use Jogmoth's Will to just win the game, rather than futz around with all these stupid, like, I'm trying to get around the fact that he has control magic, but I ought to just have pushed it and stripped it out of his hand with duress, and then with a Yogg-Will duress, and then just won the game. So I don't know what I was doing here. My opponent plays Take Possession. I had a 1/1 flyer, and my opponent has an 8/8 flyer, and at the end of combat, I'm at 8 life, and my opponent Take Possession's Crucible rather than pre-combat stealing my guy. So thanks for that, opponent. After he does that, I go ahead and Snapcaster into a vamp and vamp into Living Death. And then my opponent taps his one last mana to Stubborn Denial it. And I have Stubborn Denial and play it as a Force Spike, which gives me Elish Norn back. And of course, I know he's going to control magic me, but desperate times, I'm at 4 life. So now I Faithless Looting, just hoping that I can find some kind of out here. And I do. I Desperate Looting into Jin Gatoxis and a Force of Will, and I reanimate Jin Gatoxis. And at the end of my turn, draw up enough a full hand where I'm able to find Force of Will. I'm at 2 life now. I know my opponent has Confiscate, and I force it, but I don't know if he has another counter, and he doesn't. I now have to chump block Elish Norn, and I'm at 1 life. I drew a Thoughtseize, completely useless, can't be played, and Hardcast Shieldred. So during my opponent's upkeep, he has no bounce spell at the end of my turn. He has to sack my guy and put it back in my graveyard, and then on his turn, he duplicates Shieldred and makes a 6/6 duplicate that easily threatens to kill me. On my turn, I decide I'm gonna Demonic Tutor rather than Yogg-Will, and I go to Dak Faden and steal his 6/6. He's now working for me. And then on top of that, I Dance to the Dead Jin Gatoxis and refill my hand one more time. I actually have to watch out because I only have 38 cards in my deck, and I'm at 1 life, and Jin Gatoxis forces you to draw whether or not you want to. So I can easily either deck myself or die. So decking or dying. And my opponent, who has 10 mana in play and a Crucible of Worlds, could not find the 11th mana to play his Kozilek in his hand and had to discard his whole hand. So this turn, because I'm worried about running out of cards, I actually Dak Fade, but I want to tick up Dak. I Dak Fade my opponent, so he draws 2 and discards 2, and they're both counterspell type effects, which would have been useless against me with Jin Gatoxis, so that's a little bit unfortunate. But on his turn, he only draws a land, and he plays it, of course, because he's better than that than discarding. On my turn, he plays his commander inexplicably, so I get to cheat a bunch of stuff into play, smash him, use Dak Fade to steal his Crucible, activate and flip my Jace, who I played last turn, at some point. I flip Jace, don't even really use it for much of anything. I just plus him up just to have counters on it. Um, but at this point, my hand is perfect, right? There's only 21 cards left in my library, and I'm about to draw 3 of them. But my opponent's at 6, and I've got 12, 13 power worth of creatures in play, separated up. And I also have Dance of the Dead. So if he were to say draw something akin to Take Possession, where he was able to steal Jingatoxis in the imagine if Take Possession were still in his deck. So if he were to have done that in that case, and he stole Jingatoxis, it would have came to him tapped. He wouldn't be able to untap it. So I would have killed him with Duplicant. On the other hand, if he would have taken Duplicant, it would have came to him tapped, and he wouldn't be able to untap it before I killed him with the Jingatoxis. So he was damned there, even if he had some kind of control magic that actually he's already used anyway. So I just thought that was an amazing game because the deck's actually very resilient. And what you've seen so far is in the first game we played a pure combo, like insta kill. So that means that the deck. So let's check all the boxes. These are the things that you need to be able to do in Commander, and what you should be able to do in any older format. First of all, you need to be able to win the game early. You need to have the potential to do something absurd in the first 2 to 3 turns that can just win, 90+% of your games. So if your deck can't just win by the 3rd turn, even if it's outlier, even if it's like, well, if all the stars align, I get this hand, then I can kill you on turn 1. If you don't have something like that in your deck, then your deck probably needs to take a second look, right? So it doesn't have to be a kill piece. It can be a lock piece. So like if you can very quickly get out, like say turn 2 smokestack, right? And then some way to recur it, like on the back of a bitter blossom, for example, there's a lock, right? So it doesn't matter what it is as long as you have the potential. So that's one box that this deck checks very well. 2, you've got to be able to recover from a bad position. Clearly this deck can do it. I didn't play my best against this guy, but the point was this deck has tremendous recovery power, so I think it can win. And you've got to be able to win in low mana, and these two things go together because usually when you have one, you have the other. If you have low mana, you end up with a bad position typically. So you've got to be able to win / recover from a low mana position. This deck does that. That's a box that's checked. 3, you've got to be able to play some kind of long game. I mean, you can build a deck that doesn't have a long game, some kind of sly deck, some sort of mono red aggro thing, maybe. But actually, mono red is not a good example because mono red does have long game, and its long game is pointing burn at your face usually. So if your deck doesn't have though some kind of long game, if you just peter out and just run out of gas, then probably your deck needs some more work. And in this format, an example of a card that gives you longevity would be, for example, Skull Clamp. There's a card that gives you longevity, and so on and so forth. So and for most people, it's actually their commander. But if your commander doesn't do it on its own, or it doesn't do it well enough, then you need to have more things going in your deck. So can you do broken things? Check. Can we play in low mana situations and either recover or win? Check. Do we have longevity? Check. And then lastly, for me personally, can your deck prevent your opponent from doing the first 3 things that we just talked about? So if your deck can do the first 3 things only, then you have a pure threat deck, but no prevention or very little prevention. I have like 1 Force of Will. That's Anyway, so if you don't have preventative measures, then what you're doing is you're saying, I want to play a game where sometimes I randomly win, other times I win the long game, and occasionally I just get blown out and I'm completely helpless to do anything about it. And if you like playing that way, that's fine, but for me, I hate playing that way, which is why I play blue exclusively, because I can't stand being subject to the whims of, well, I want to have maximum control over my deck so I can win or lose based on the decisions I make and not just sheer luck. And I also want to stop my opponent from doing things that feel awful when I'm on the receiving end. And I also want to protect the things that I'm doing that feel awful when I'm on the producing side. So these deck can check all 4 of those boxes very easily, as could the previous iteration of Breya, which was the control version. And I recommend that if you do build a deck, those are the 4 things you can look for. Meanwhile, I hope you enjoyed this game. I won on 2 minutes, 1 life, and only 3 draw phases. I was about 14, so I was about 2 turns away from decking. So almost decked, almost timed out, and as close to dead as you can pretty much get, and managed to pull out the win here. Something about drawing 7 cards per turn will often make that happen. So that's all I've got now. I will have the deck list in the comments, as I mentioned earlier. It is in flux, and finally, we will have a metric to determine whether or not I even know what I'm talking about. Because while I get lots of wins in this room, and you've seen I have a very good record, I've never played, just like nobody else has ever played, to my knowledge, outside of a few niche situations. True Magic for backing up Commander with the express purpose of actually trying to win a tournament. I think there's some tournament out there that I've heard exists, but basically, online especially, it hasn't existed, and so I won't really know if I really know what I'm doing until I can actually put up some tournament results and we can see, hey, does Nate actually have a grip on what works or not? Because while this all looks good and it looks pretty in a vacuum or against untuned random players, I have no idea how well it'll perform or will fail to perform when I'm up against hardcore decks of a similar caliber, whether or not they're using the same strategy. If they're trying to push like hardcore stacks based decks, elf combo, really well designed burn decks with main deck pyroblast and red blast and things that make me unhappy. So I don't know how this deck will work out, but I will continue to work on it, and hopefully you all enjoyed it. And I look forward to your suggestions for what we can do to make this thing the best deck in the format, if possible. And then if we've solved that puzzle, we'll work on another version to put right up there and compete with it. But that'll be for later. That's all I have now. Thank you for watching. Don't worry, the sky's not falling. The format's still going to be fun, and I think it's actually going to be, frankly, a lot better experience overall. And I'm certain that if something like this or anything else becomes too oppressive, they'll ban what's necessary to fix it. And based on what they're doing now, that gives me a pretty good feeling. So all I ask is, Wizards, please split the multiplayer and single player ban list. It's the one thing you didn't do this time that you should have done. Is the only mistake with this. Every other mistake easily corrected, but that mistake is an Achilles heel until it's fixed. It's going to be a huge weakness in making this a competitive and beloved format by both sets of players. Two sets of players with two different ideas about what the format's about, the 1v1 versus the multiplayer crowd. And also, the multiplayer crowd's complaints are valid because things that trigger or affect all players in 1v1, it affects you just as much as your opponent. In multiplayer, it affects three opponents and only one of you, which means for you, it's 1/3 is painful. Like it's usually 50-50, even pain for both. Now your enemies take triple the pain for your pain. So it's much better, like a Winter Orb, for example. Or if you play a card like a card that destroys one, for each opponent destroys one of their permanents. That in 1v1, that's just a single card effect. But in multiplayer, that's triple. As it's a 300% power rating on that card. So they really do need to be separate ban lists because cards don't interact the same way in multiplayer that they do in here. Prophet of Krufix in 1v1 was a card I didn't even play in my Edric deck. And you would think of all decks, that would be the deck to put it in. I didn't even play it because I didn't consider it to be good enough in 1v1 for what it did. In multiplayer, it is a no-brainer. Slam it in your deck if you're playing blue-green because it's absurd because the card effectively operates like you've got like three mana flares or something personally, and nobody else has any of them because you get to use all your mana up to play it, and then all your mana a second time on one of your opponent's turns, then a third time, then a fourth time, and now it's back to your turn, and you got 4 times the mana for a 5 mana investment. That's like in a Mirari's Wake on steroids, right? That's completely, utterly insane. and degenerate. And in 1v1, it's negligible. So they have got to split up the ban list. I hope they do that. But anyway, thanks for watching, folks. Hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you liked the deck. I look forward to your comments, and I'll see you next time.